Okay, so in this one, we will be talking about bourgeois virtue, kind of bringing the discussion of virtuous ethics up to date, right? What do what's ingrained in the course of our teaching and training? What's ingrained in the typical American, at least as far as American civil religion goes, and what may seem strange to others if they move to the United States and they discover this rendition of virtue. So we call these bourgeois virtues, and the bourgeois virtues go all the way back to the American founding. So let's get started. So we have here good old Benjamin Franklin, and he's very famous, of course, all around. Was among those who discovered the power of electricity. Had a lot to say during the founding period about how Americans should view their government, what kind of life they ought to live. One thing that's kind of interesting about Franklin is, though he discussed virtues, and I'll put a link to a web page that has all 13 of the virtues that he extolled. But he admittedly didn't actually live an awful lot of those virtues. He was definitely a work in progress, and he admitted as much. He was not always moderate in drink or in society, let us say. All right. But anyway, let's talk about substituting liberal, quote, bourgeois virtues for these more ancient and medieval virtue notions. So Terry Cooper, towards the end of her selection, says about this transformation: with the loss of a coherent ultimate end, either in the Aristotelian or Christian sense, virtue increasingly became an end in itself. There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, she uses the ancient Greek term for happiness here. So, the aim for Aristotle, as far as, the appeal for the individual who would become virtuous, was happiness in the fullest sense possible. Or another way to define this would be, to translate it would be human flourishing. Okay. The ultimate end in the Christian sense was literally heaven, right? Being able to attain the beatific vision, to become unified with God, to receive the blessings of the afterlife. Now, those receded as we moved into modern times, and we became enamored of the idea of human autonomy, of there being a separation between, say, our religious experience and our, the rest of our lives, our occupations, who we are as citizens, and so forth, right? And more of an emphasis upon business, because we moved from an agrarian feudal economy, pretty simple, not a lot of growth, to a growing dynamic economy that became known as capitalism, but was definitely developing during the founding period of the United States. So during this time, commerce was a huge deal. It was a huge deal to the American founders. They argued about how much international commerce the country should engage in, what kind of goods it ought to receive, and what it ought to manufacture itself, and so on and so forth. Alexander Hamilton, for instance, advocated for the national bank, and he advocated for American power as global commerce right at the beginning of the founding. So with that, right, the minds of people in Western liberal society began to turn towards a more instrumental view of virtue. Okay. Still, the idea of virtue being instilled, a lot of these early figures talked about it in the same way. You know, you need to be educated, you need to be raised. But how would they be educated and raised? Well, they would be educated and raised to become good businessmen, right? To become good citizens and good businessmen, and a lot less emphasis on, you know, the more inner qualities, especially of the Christian sense, right? Of purity and holiness, or previous qualities that were admired, such as warlikeness or honor or courage, right? And more focus was placed on, the qualities of a human being that were conducive to good business. So, just to give you an idea, though, let's look at some of these virtues according to Ben Franklin. This is from his autobiography, and I think I'll put this website in the module so you can check this out yourself. Anyway, you can see these are, many of them are, if not all of them are, the purpose of them is to make you a reasonable, moderate, likable, predictable, hardworking person who can conduct a business and commerce effectively in this world. So he starts out with temperance, eating not to dullness, drink but not to elevation. In other words, don't get drunk. He totally violated that one. Silence, very important. Speak not what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. For instance, if you are a small business person, right? Maybe don't put an inflammatory banner or flag right in front of your business or even in front of your house from this particular angle, because that will discourage some people from wanting to do business with you. Try to be nice even when you don't feel like it. Order, he says, let all things have their place. Let each part of your business have its time, which is to be, organized. Resolution, resolve to perform what you ought, perform without fail what you resolve. Do what you say you're going to do, and do not waffle. Frugality, make no expense but to do good to others or yourself. Waste nothing. A very important trait for a business person to have, right? Try to cut expenses. Do not waste anything. Industry, which is, you may think of this as, like the factory or whatever, but industry in this sense is to be industrious, right? Lose no time, he says. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Again, I have to say, he did not always do this. Sincerity, don't use any hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly. And if you speak, speak accordingly. All right. Now, here we have a quality that could be internalized, but wouldn't have to be. In other words, one can do this on the surface and be known for this, but not actually be sincere. But sincerity itself is a very modern virtue. It substitutes for actual belief. For instance, Locke, in some of his letters concerning toleration, argued that we needed to respect people of different faiths for the sincerity of their beliefs, how strongly they held them, and how consistent they were, rather than by the content of what they believed. Now, this is a virtue that's designed to bring peace amongst people, again, because you want peace. People who are interested in commerce do not want conflict. They want peace so that they can go about their business. Justice he defines as wronging none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Don't harm people, and do not omit or actually pay what you owe. Do the things that you say you're going to do, or that you've obligated yourself to do. Moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. In other words, hold back your anger or your sadness, your emotions, right? Again, for the same reasons. You don't want to upset people or alienate them. Nothing good comes from this. Cleanliness, tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. That's your house, sorry. You don't want to turn people off. If you come to work and you have, strong body odor, or you're wearing clothes that are all a shamble and it doesn't look respectful, these are not things that commend you highly to others. Number 11 is tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles or accidents, common or unavoidable. Just stay steady. Stick to the decisions you've made. Don't let yourself be disturbed, because if others, for instance, can get to you by sending a small insult your way and you get caught up in that, you've taken your eye off of the central target, which is to profit from this perspective. So all of that is to no avail. Now, interestingly, here's one that at first sounds like an internalized moral virtue, but it's maybe not. Number 12, chastity, which he defines as rarely use venery, which is sex, but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. So, chastity doesn't necessarily mean to be chaste, as in to not have sex unless you're married from this perspective. Although for offspring kind of does like ring a bell there. But, it's his notion here is that when you do it, when you engage in, carnal matters, that you keep in mind other people's peace and reputation. Right. So this might mean that if you did do something that that society might look askance at, you make sure that they don't see it, because you do not want to injure. It is, and I think that Franklin would genuinely say it's better to not even do this, but we have to keep in mind primarily another's peace and reputation. Right. And these things, again, when we violate these rules, these are some of the things that make people the most angry and that is hardest of all to forget. So Franklin is saying be very careful here. And finally, he says humility. Imitate Jesus and Socrates in this regard. Okay? Remain humble. Here again, there is some wiggle room as to how we interpret this. Franklin did see Jesus and Socrates as similar types of figures. They were both great philosophers and wise men, and both of them argued to not, try to climb for power or to call undue attention to oneself or seek, honors all over the place and, become angry if one didn't receive them and things like this. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, be forgiving, and so on. And Franklin seems to be saying those qualities are also good. They are what make for a well-rounded bourgeois individual. All right, so there's just a peek at the bourgeois virtues. And I guess I just want you to contemplate the contrast between the ancient medieval and now these more modern virtues, and how in each case, the type of person that is being formed is the person that fits the circumstances of their time. In ancient times, they were looking for leaders and for benefactors of society and people who could, benefit the public, and think about the common good and not simply take advantage of others. Because back in those days, the wealthiest and smartest and most powerful people, they could do a lot of harm. Even though Athens was a democracy for a time, even during that time, the wealthy, clever people would climb to the top. And then the question was, how would they use that power and that wealth? So we had to form them in a way that was kind of heroic, in order to take care of that, to make them aim at glory that they could get through being the very best leaders they could be. And of course, for the medieval period, some of that remained, but it was but added on to that was the fact that the social ideal was the holy person, right? The great saint. And so the society was aiming at that. That's what was encouraged, right? In addition to the types of, it also, encouraged leaders to be self-controlled through some of these more ancient virtues, but also through these Christian ones to keep them under control. Now, when you get to modern times in the Western world, at any rate, you get this new type of person, the man of business, so to speak, or the person of business, the successful, materially successful person. And in order to achieve a state, so the story goes, that is to benefit everybody, each person should be working, for their own good, which also then translates from this perspective into everybody's good as the economy expands, as technology increases, and as wealth is more grows and expands. Okay. So the type of person changes, and with that change comes different definitions of what it means to be virtuous. But in all cases, habituation is key here, right? Even for Franklin's virtues, these are virtues that you would have to be raised with. Notice they are not philosophers' virtues, right? They are the virtues of the common citizen and worker and business person. All right. See you next time when we will get into virtue as consequence.